This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so let's see where we are. So let's firstly go into our YAML file that we have written yesterday, and let's understand a couple of things. So we are doing a comparison between JSON and YAML, and we said how do you write a YAML file, and what is something known as an array in YAML versus an array in JSON, and how do you go ahead and represent objects in, let's say, something like a YAML definition out here. Now, why did we even learn this out? Is the reason being I'd like to use this particular YAML basics in order to go ahead and write something called as my Azure pipeline files. Meaning I want to, let's say, go ahead and store my pipeline inside a YAML file so that I can then start going ahead and applying all my branches and all my branching policies onto these particular files out here. So that whenever you as a DevOps engineer tries to update these files, even you come under the scope of the branching policies. So that's where we are heading down to. And even before I write a YAML file, even before we go and start writing the YAML file for Azure pipelines, let's do one thing. Let's go again into our own project, which is our classic pipeline project out here. So let's go into sample learning and let's take a look at the iOS project that we were really working. And let's look at the classic pipeline firstly before we get started. So if I just edit this out, now if you take a look at the classic pipeline, uh, it has a name for this particular pipeline. You can edit this particular name, you can redo this particular name, and sorry, and this is where you have something called as triggers, wherein you can define, is it a continuous trigger, or it is a continuous integration pipeline, or is it a manual pipeline? And if it is a continuous integration pipeline, what kind of a branch are we really looking at out here? So you can set the branch out here telling that, okay, fine, you know what, I want to do a continuous integration from something like a develop branch. And you just tick this box out telling that, okay, fine, I need a continuous integration. And if it goes through a continuous integration, whenever a developer goes ahead and merges their pull request out here, this pipeline is going to trigger, and it's going to, let's say, try and produce an artifact for you. This is what this pipeline is going to. So now what I'll do, I'll just disable this for now. I'll just come down, and then it tells you what is your source. Where is your, let's say, where is the code really coming from? And then you have the stages that is starting. Now this is actually called a stage, wherein we are going ahead and, let's say, doing a build. So I can call this as a build stage. And if I just scroll down, in a stage, we also go ahead and mention what kind of an agent pool and what kind of a specification, or what is the specification of the agent that we're using. So in my case, I'm using an Azure hosted agent, and it's a Windows latest agent out here that I'm using. So I did take a Windows latest agent and I was trying to build this out. Then there are a couple of steps like .NET restore, build, publish, and then we are also copying that particular artifact, and then we are going in and publishing this particular artifact out here. Now, one of the simplest way to get started is that if you know how to, let's say, go ahead and draft out a classic pipeline, which we are doing over the last, let's say, couple of days, you can just go to the classic pipeline, just click on the classic pipeline out here, and in the top right corner you have these three dots. Just click on this, and here you have two options called export to JSON and export to YAML. So Azure tells you that, okay, fine, you know what, you might like to, let's say, write this down in YAML. I'll also give you an option to go ahead and export this out. So if I just do export to YAML, let's also compare the differences out here. I'll also say export to JSON. So the same pipeline in two different definitions. You can write the pipeline in JSON, or you can also write the pipeline in YAML, but it actually is a lot different. So let me show in folder. Let me copy this out, and let us go into our junk folder. Let's place this in, come into our VS Code, and I have these two files that I was actually looking at. So the same pipeline, which is called build application or .NET build application, in a JSON format. It might look, let's say, a simple line out here. So let me go ahead and format this out, the format selection. And this is your entire JSON definition for the pipeline. You can write the pipeline in JSON. You can do that. You can say branch filter is this one and all that stuff. You can do that. but it's really difficult for you to, let's say, go ahead and replicate the same thing across different environments. It's very difficult for me to go ahead and, let's say, reuse this particular file, throw it into a different project, and then get started. It's super, let's say, not convenient in order to, let's say, reuse this particular file, because it's running into, let's say, about 381 lines of code. That's just because I have a very simple pipeline, and I have like about 381 lines of code out here. Imagine when you are working in a real-time environment, you would have, let's say, about 20, 30 steps out here in a pipeline. This file is going to run into thousands of lines. Whereas on the other hand, if you look at a YAML file for the same pipeline, it's simple, it's very neat, it's very clean. And if you just scroll down, it's just telling, you know what? I'll just scroll down out here. That's it. Same pipeline being represented in YAML. And now if you see how different these both are, I'll just compare it, or just, let's say, open it to the side. Let's say yes. So left hand side of my screen, the JSON file, and the right hand side of my screen is the YAML file. It makes life very simpler in order to, let's say, go ahead and start writing pipeline. It makes super simple for you to, let's say, go ahead and just start writing this out with, let's say, very minimal hassle. So what you can do is that whenever you are writing a pipeline in a real-time environment, you can first take that pipeline, and you can first, let's say, do a classic version of it. You can say, this is a classic version of that particular pipeline. And once you do a classic version of it, then you can replicate the same thing in a YAML definition. You can say, okay, fine, you know what, this is the same pipeline. I'll just export this out. And this is the entire, let's say, pipeline that it gives you. This is one of the techniques. Let's also do one more thing. Let's also try start writing this particular same pipeline from the scratch using our YAML basics to understand what are all, let's say, the components that you need to really focus on, and how do you even get started, when you don't have any pipelines out there. Let's say you are working for a client who's directly telling that, you know what, don't do classic, directly do YAML. So how do you get started with that? So let's do that. Not do that, let's go into, I'll say, Azure DevOps documentations. I'll say Azure DevOps pipeline documentation, and I'll just go here. Sorry, I'll just go here, and this will have you, or this will give you a lot of links out here telling what is a pipeline, what does it do, and what are, let's say, different things out here, and etc. But I'm rather more focused upon this particular area, wherein it says key concepts for a new users to the Azure pipelines out here. So let's go in there, and here it says key concepts for new users to start using these pipelines, and it has also a video, and it's pretty informative. But I'm not really looking at that one. I'm looking at this particular diagram, wherein it is telling you how do you start a pipeline, how do you start writing something in, let's say, Azure DevOps, how do you really start this out. And it all starts with something called as a trigger. So just like we had a classic pipeline earlier, if I edit this out, I had something called trigger, wherein I can mention whether I need a continuous integration trigger, or whether is it a manual trigger basically that I'm looking at, and so on and so forth. So I say trigger, and after the trigger, I can have multiple stages in my pipeline, which means within the same pipeline, you can do a stage called build, and inside that particular stage, you can have multiple tasks like .NET Restore, .NET Build, .NET Publish, Publish artifacts, and etc. And you can have one more stage here called deploy. So you can do multiple stages in your pipeline. You can do multi-stage YAML pipelines out here. You can write the files, let's say, exhaustively in order to, let's say, have multiple stages out here as such. But the only, let's say, caveat out here, or the only, let's say, thing that you have to notice out here is that whenever you go ahead and, let's say, declare a stage, you have to declare what is the agent on which this stage needs to run. What is, let's say, the agent on which this particular stage needs to run out here as such. And then here you can be using something like a self-hosted agent or a hosted agent out here. And under a stage, you need to declare what is the agent job. When I say job, this is what it is. So if I just go back, this is an agent job for me. In a classic pipeline, under the job, I have all the tasks that I mentioned out here. Same thing applies, but in a little bit different style. So under a job, you have steps. Under steps, you have something like all the tasks out here that you can mention. So if I have to write down the skeleton of a YAML pipeline, so let me go ahead and do that. I'll say Azure DevOps YAML. And if I just have to write the skeleton, if I have to start writing that, I will start with triggers or a trigger. So this is where I start. And since I can have multiple triggers in a pipeline, meaning if you go even to a classic pipeline, you can say triggers, you can say enable continuous integration, you can add multiple things out here. You can say feature branch, please trigger it out from a feature branch as well, or please trigger it out from a main branch as well. So whenever the main gets updated, whenever the feature gets updated, or whenever let's say any branch gets updated, your build pipeline will trigger. That's what I'm trying to set out. So since this is an array, you can say trigger, press and enter. And if I have to, let's say, give the properties for this particular trigger, I'll say tab, because now I need to mention all the child properties of it. I can say main, I can say develop, I can say feature, and so on and so forth. I can keep declaring all these things out here as such. If I don't want a continuous integration trigger, let's say for some case you don't need a continuous integration trigger at all, you only want a manual integration, you can remove all these things and you can give this as a key value pair called trigger is equal to none. I don't need any trigger, so that this will make sure to do a manual integration. And after a trigger, if you look at your diagram, you have something called stages. So there is a parent property that you need to mention called stages, under which you can have multiple stages. For example, you can say stage, you can say this is stage 1, then you can say stage, then you can say stage 2. So stage 1 can be something like a build stage. Stage 2 can be something like a deployment stage. So you can have multiple stages within the same pipeline out here. That's the reason I am declaring the stage under the stages. So I say stages, this is the parent property, under which I'm giving a tab and I'm saying stage 1, stage 2 and so on and so forth. These are all child properties under that particular stage. So child properties under that particular stage out here. And as I said, each and every stage needs to have something called as an agent pool. So you need to declare what is the really running on. So when I go into my classic pipeline also, let's say this is a stage and I need to mention what is the pool on which the stage needs to run. So this is a stage. I'm mentioning this, mentioning the pool on which the stage is running. In the same way in YAML also, I can just say a property called pool. And I can just mention what is the pool that I'm really running this particular pipeline on. And again, I'm just writing the basic skeleton, I'm not getting into the pipeline. So we'll get into the pipeline once we go into Azure DevOps. And under the pool, you can give the properties of the pool. So if you want to give the properties of anything, just give a tab. Come under that particular, let's say, parent property, and you can give, let's say, something in this pool and so on and so forth. Once you give the pool, you have a section for variables out here in Classic, right? You can also have a section for variables in YAML. You can do multiple variables out here. After that, you have something called jobs. This is this one, agent jobs. You can have multiple jobs out here, and under which I can declare something called job. Again, here you can have job 1, job 2, job 3, and so on and so forth. And so on and so forth out here. And under a job, jobs. So you have jobs under which you have a job. And then you have something called as steps for this particular job, under which you can go ahead and start writing your tasks. So you can say task 1, which can be something like .NET Restore. You can say task 2. You can say something like .NET Build. Then you have task 3, 4, and so on and so forth. Very importantly, if you see the syntax, you say .NET Publish. Okay, so very importantly, if you see the syntax, it's a tree kind of a structure that I'm trying to represent. So trigger is a parent property, stages is a parent property, and if I collapse stages, everything comes under that particular stages. And then I have something called stage, which is called build. And under the stage, I need to mention what is the pool on which the stage needs to run. Then I say what are the variables that I need. Then I have something called the jobs, and under which I have something called job steps. And then under the steps, I have multiple tasks out here. That's what even the diagram is telling. Trigger, stage. Under the stage, you need to mention what is the agent that you need to, let's say, acquire. And under each stage, you have something called job. And under job, you have steps. And under steps, you have something called tasks out here as such. This is the bare basic skeleton on how do you get started. So, when you go to the interview, they are just going to ask you, can you just give me the high level overview of how do you write a YAML pipeline? Can you just tell me what are all the components of a YAML pipeline, and how do you, let's say, declare something called as an agent job, or how do you declare a stage in the YAML pipeline? Can you go ahead and, let's say, share your screen and write the same thing out here as such? So this is going to be a couple of, let's say, things that you need to, really think about. So before you go ahead and start writing a YAML pipeline, just have a very bare basic idea or a very high level picture of how a YAML pipeline will look like once you start writing it out. Once this is done, let me now start going ahead and writing my actual pipeline out here. How do I write my actual pipeline? The best way to write your actual pipeline, don't use VS Code, use Azure DevOps directly. This will help you with intelligence. It will help you, let's say, whenever you're writing, right? It will give you autofills. It will tell you what is the error, where is the error, how you're doing, and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and say click on pipelines and say new pipeline. And once I do a new pipeline today, I'm not going to use the classic editor. I'm not going to touch the classic editor. I'll say Azure DevOps Git in YAML. I'll take this out. And I have this particular repository called iOS application. I'll take this iOS application. And what I'll do is I'll say I'll do a starter pipeline from the scratch. And I'll just go ahead and whatever is there, I'll just delete all these things out. I'll just delete all these things out. And then, as I said, it needs to start with something called as trigger. So I'll just go back. I'll do a control plus space. It's going to load what are all the properties that I can use. I'll look for something called trigger. In my case, I'll start doing a trigger called none, which is manual integration. So I'll say space none. This is a manual integration trigger. This is now a manual integration out here. I will say enter, and after the trigger comes, I need to have something called as a stage. I need to mention something called stage, and inside which, or something called stages, inside which I have multiple stages out here as well. So I look for something called stages, inside which is telling, okay, fine, you know what, you have to start here, and you have to give a property called a stage. So control space, I'll say stage. Coming under the stage. Now, very importantly, you'll have to place your cursor uh, right under the S of that particular stage, because this is now the properties of the stage that I'm, let's say, mentioning out there. And I'll say, what is the display name? Now, you can give a display name optional. It is for your benefit out here. And say it's a build stage. I'm trying to do some build out here. I'll say enter, and it is telling me what is the pool that I need to use. I'll say pool, and again I want to mention the properties of the pool. I'll give a tab under the pool. I need to come under the pool out here, and if I do a control space, right, it's telling me what is the name of the pool. So in case, right, if you have a self-hosted pool, you can go into the agent pool out here. If you have something like a self-hosted pool, for example, I have something called my pool 7am. I can copy this name. I can come here, say name. I can paste this. telling my pool 7 a.m. out here as such. But if you are using a hosted pool, let's say if you're doing a hosted pool out here, what you do is remove everything. Say VM image. So you just tell, okay, fine, VM image, this is what you need to use. I'll say Windows latest. So this is how I declare something known as a hosted pool out here. This is a hosted pool. But if you want to declare something like a self-hosted pool, we also show that. I'll say it is name space and then I'll give the name of the pool. You can declare what is the name of the pool out here as such. So I'll say pool and then VM image is equal to Windows latest. Same like telling in my classic pipeline that you know what, I need a self-hosted, sorry, I need a hosted agent with something like Windows latest out here as such. So same, I'm just here, I have a drop down, I can select everything. But in the YAML syntax, I need to write the same thing out here as such. Once the pool is done, and again, make sure my cursor is under the stage because these are all now the child properties out here that I'm declaring. So I'm declaring the stage out here and I'll say variables. I have multiple variables. So for example, if you see your .NET restore task or your .NET build task is using a variable called build configuration. And then if you scroll down, you have a variable called build.artifact staging directory, the build configuration, all these things. So these are the two variables that I'm looking at. One is called build configuration. If you look at the variable section, one is called build configuration. The other is called build platform. In which platform you want to build this out and so on and so forth. So I'll say build configuration since this is something that I'm using. And I need to declare the child properties of a variable section. So what I do is I come under the variable. So tab under the variable out here and say build configuration colon release. If you have one more, let's say property called build platform, you can say build platform colon any CPU. You can give multiple variables. You can start declaring multiple variables out here into your pipeline by using, let's say, this particular syntax. If you have a variable group also, we'll also see how do you get a variable group and so on and so forth. So in the release pipeline, we'll also see how do you get a variable group rather than using something like a predefined pipeline variables out here as such. So this is how I declare a variable. And once I have a variable, right, let me see what all that I need out here. So if I go back, I have the stage, I have the agent, and I have the, so I do not have the job. I just have the pool. I need to mention what is the job, what the agent needs to do. So I'll just come back and I'll search for something called jobs. It's an array. You can have multiple jobs out here. Once I do that, it's automatically coming under the job and it's telling, okay, fine, you know what, you can declare an array. I'll do again a control space. Then it's telling, do you want to do a deployment? Do you want to do actually a job out here? I say, yes, I want to do a job. It's not a deployment. Enter. And now come under the job. Exactly under the J of the job. And I'll say, I'll start with something like display name. I can say it is a build job again. I can simply give something like build. And then I have something called as steps. This is what I have. I have job and under the job I have something known as what? Steps. And under the step I have something called tasks. The actual tasks start here. The actual tasks start here. So if you see trigger, then stages, collapse the stage, everything should come under the stage out here. And I'll just come here and then I'll go ahead and let's say start writing my tasks out here as such. So I'll say, you can go ahead and start writing your tasks here, telling it is .NET restore, build and all that stuff. The easier way to do it is here in the right side, right? You have something called show assistant. Click on this. You can say .NET. You want to do a .NET restore, and now it's asking what is the path to your project. Give me the let's say give me the CS project file. I'll just go ahead get my CS project file out here. So this is iOS application inside which I have something called CS project. I'll just copy the path. I'll come here. I'll place this path out here, and I'll say okay, fine, all this is good. And make sure that the cursor is exactly out here. Okay, let me do one thing. Let me remove this out because it'll add one more hyphen there. So I'll say add. It's now adding the first task out here. So if you see under the step, I have first task. How much of a space is there? That's not a problem, but it should, you make sure that this task is coming under the step. So the steps can tell you that okay, fine, these are the tasks because these are all the child properties to a step out here. And I can say here, I can give a display name to my task, telling it is .NET Restore. I'm doing something called as a .NET Restore out here as such. I'll just scroll down, and if you look at your classic pipeline, right, you have a restore, then you have a build. Now, if you do not know how to, let's say, even add this out, let's say something like .NET, you do not, you're a little confused out here. You can come down to your classic pipeline, and here, if you click on the build, right, it's telling this is display name, build, and all that stuff. Here, you have something called view YAML. Click on this. This will give you the task definition, telling this is how you use YAML out here. I just copy this out. Just go back. Make sure my, let's say, cursor is exactly under the, let's say, the hyphen of the task. Paste this out, and there'll be a little bit of slight misalignment. So just copy this out. Make sure you are getting it under the T of the task out here. So task display name is build. Inputs, it's telling some parameters out here. So I'll remove this out. It's telling what is your project. And earlier I had that .NET Restore, right? I'll just copy this out and I'll paste it here. This is the part to my project. And then arguments hyphen hyphen build configuration, and build configuration is a variable that I declared here. Is a variable that I declared out here as such. This is the second task with a display name called .NET build. So I'll say this is .NET build. I can give a display name optionally out here as such. Then I have something called .NET publish. So if you look at my pipeline, I have a .NET publish. Then I have the copy files. Again, you can just, let's say, view the YAML out here. You can take the entire YAML, or you can again write this out, not a problem. Anything is okay with me. I'll say .NET. I'll say this is publish, and then it's going to ask me what is the path to the project. What is your project out here? I already I already copied the path to the project. I'll say this is the project out here, and then you have the arguments. You can simply go here, copy your arguments from a classic. You can simply copy the arguments out here and paste this, making sure my cursor is exactly under, let's say, the T. I'll say add. This is the .NET publish task that I have, and I can give a display name out here, telling it is .NET publish. I'll say this is .NET publish out here as such. And then I have the copy artifacts. So add one more task. I'll say copy files, the source folder. If you look at the source folder again, it's nothing but infrastructure. It's called infrastructure out here. I want to copy all these files. So I'll say infrastructure is my source folder, all the contents, and paste it inside something called build.artifact staging directory, which is nothing but your drop location. So you can copy that from, let's say, this particular section out here, or you can go to Azure DevOps predefined variables and also copy that. This is here. Make sure that the cursor is exactly here. So this is important to make sure that the cursor is exactly under the task, and say add. If it's not, you'll have a misalignment. So it will become a little difficult for you to, let's say, adjust those spaces. So it's better for us to, let's say, adjust the space initially and then add the task. And then I can give a display name out here. And I can give a display name out here, telling it is something like this. Then I can scroll down. Finally, I have my publish artifacts. I'll say publish. I have something called publish build artifacts. I'll just add this out the way it is. And finally, I'll give something called as a display name out here, as such called publish artifacts. And this is now my entire build pipeline, which is trigger, then stages. And under the stage, we have properties called as hyphen stage. You can have another hyphen stage and Here, let's say deployment. I said this is a build stage. I just scroll down. I said pool, and I said I'm using a hosted pool called. And if I want to, let's say, use a hosted pool, I'm telling it is VM image colon, and then let's say give the name of the image like Windows latest. And then I have the different variables that I'm mentioning. Then I have the jobs. And inside the job, I have the steps. And inside the steps, I have the tasks. And for the task, as I said, you can use it from a classic pipeline. You can copy it from there, or you can use the show assistant out here. So this is our entire pipeline. So trigger, the stage, and inside which you can have multiple stages out. I mean stages, and then inside which you can have multiple stages out here. And each and every stage needs to have its own agent job or agent pool. So I've given something called as an agent pool, and inside which I said something called as job. Inside job I have steps. Inside step I have task. That's how my pipeline is going right now. So I have stages. So if I come from the bottom, I have the steps, which is falling under something called jobs. That is falling under something called stage. That is falling under a parent property called stages. Your pipeline or your file should collapse like this. This will tell you that your file is, let's say, rightly arranged, rightly aligned. So each and every property has a sub property to it. This is how I have written my file out here. So instead of, let's say, creating a pipeline, I have written a file. Now I can go ahead and save this file. I'll say create a new branch for this, and let's say I don't want to start a pull request. I'll give the name of the branch like feature Kiran YML YAML. I'll say this is a new YAML pipeline. Save this out. So all I'm doing is that I'm saving my pipeline or I'm saving my file. I'm not creating a pipeline yet. So if you go into a pipeline, right, and say all, it will automatically create a pipeline called iOS application, the name of the repository. Now I don't need this. I'll just delete this out, and I'll just give the name of the pipeline. You're saying iOS application. I don't need that. What I need is the file. So I have something called YAML, right? This is the file that I need. So this is how the file looks like. It tells, okay, fine, this is the file. This is what exactly that I need. And what I'll do right now is that I'll go ahead and place this file inside the develop branch of my repository. So I'll just go ahead, copy this entire file out here. So this is the main branch because my default was a main. So it just took from the main out here. But I need this file inside my develop branch of the repository because this is where all my code is there and all that stuff. So I'll just go into the develop. But the issue is that develop branch has policies on top of it. So firstly, let me do one thing. Let me disable the policies today because I have to again go ahead, approve this out and so on and so forth. I'll just disable all the policies out here, but I can go disable of policies. I can delete this particular policy out here. Refresh the screen. This policy should be undone. So let me do one thing. Let me go ahead into the develop branch and let me add a file here. I'll tell this is a build pipeline.yaml file. Something like YML. I'll say enter. It's the entire file out here. I'll say commit. I'll say added a pipeline file out here as such. So all I did is that I came to Azure DevOps and I used Azure DevOps in order to write my file in a proper order. Then I'm saving my file. And once my file is saved, now see, your entire pipeline file is now saved as a file out here, or your entire pipeline is now saved as a file out here. And now you can now track all the history that went in. So if I click on this, it's telling you know what, this is the entire file that got added. And if you had a pull request with branch policies and etc., you could have also done reverts on top of it. You'll also see that. Now what I'll do, see, I just have a file, but I did not create a pipeline yet. So initially I started with, I said new pipeline. I just wanted to do that because I go ahead and write a file. That's it. I have a file. Once I have a file, I'll say new pipeline. I'll do the same thing again, Azure pipelines. I'll say iOS application. I'll say it's not a starter pipeline. It's an existing Azure pipeline file. I'll say pipeline file. I look for the file. I'll say it is the develop branch of my repository. And it is this particular file called build pipeline.yaml. And let's say, okay, fine. This is the, let's say, name of the pipeline that you will get created. And this is the repository that you're using. I'll say continue. And I'll say run. Now it is creating a pipeline with a name called iOS application. You can of course edit this name of the pipeline later. Now it's going ahead and creating the jobs under which it's telling, okay, fine, you're doing a build. And it's telling, okay, fine, you're using a pool called Azure Pipelines. The image is latest out here. Let's wait for a minute for this job to run. So it's telling the agent is already, let's say, running and completing some jobs. So let's wait for a couple of minutes for the agent to be allocated. Then you have your entire pipeline. So now it's telling, okay, fine, you know what, you have a build, you have initialized job, you have checkout, you have the .NET Restore, build, publish, everything. Now all these things right now is being saved as a file into your developer branch of the repository. This is the pipeline is now running out of that particular file. Based on that file, the pipeline is now running. And let's do a refresh. It'll take some time and it'll take about 1 minute or so. Same thing. I have an iOS application. Now you can also edit the name of the pipeline. I'll say rename the pipeline. I'll say YAML build pipeline or something like this. I can rename this pipeline anytime that I need. And if I go into the pipeline, it's finished the job. The build job is finished. And I also have the artifact published. Two different artifacts. Same thing what I am doing with the classic, I'm also doing with YAML. But the way I'm writing YAML, the way I'm treating YAML is completely different from the way that I'm treating classic. So again, if you see, you have a lot of steps out here. Just like now, what I'll do, and I only disable the branch policies to make sure that I just go ahead and add the file without the approvals and all that stuff. Now I'll reintroduce the branch policy. So let me go ahead and say branch policies, and I'll say require minimum number of users one. I'll just put one small branch policy out here, and let's see what really happens. Now, if I am a DevOps engineer, I want to do some edit to my pipelines. I'll come here. I'll say edit the pipeline. As and when I'm doing the edit the pipeline, just see guys, this is editing a file inside your repository. It's not editing a pipeline. It's editing a file inside your repository. It's saying, okay, fine, you want to edit the pipeline. Yes, I agree. But I won't let you edit the pipeline directly. You have to edit the source file of the pipeline. And now if I, let's say, do any mistake, I am a new, again, just like the earlier example, I'm a new hire. I don't know what is this. I just come here. I just remove something, try to save this out. I'll try save. It's telling what? Pushes to the branch are not permitted, which means that you cannot make a change to the pipeline until and unless you have an approval. So I am forced to go ahead and create a new branch. So again, I'll say, okay, fine, since the approval is needed, I'll say feature Kiran test YAML change, something like that. Save this out. And then from this branch, I can now go ahead and create a pull request. Or if you want to test your pipeline, you can also run the pipeline from this particular branch. You can say, you know what, I want to run this pipeline, but I don't want to run it from a develop branch. I want to run it from my feature branch. I'll say run. And this will itself tell you whether it's failing or whether it's, let's say, successful and so on and so forth. Once that's done, you can go ahead and say pull request, new pull request out here from that feature branch to my develop branch. And okay, fine, this is YAML change. Okay, active branch is fine. Okay, fine. So it already created, let's say, this particular change. So, and again, as and when I see this, now I need to give an approval out here. So now what I did is that earlier it was properly like CS project and etc. Now I edited it and I have all these edits out here. As a reviewer, I can ask you, did this edit actually work? Did you run the pipeline? Is the pipeline working? If it's okay, only then I'll go ahead and give the approval. So now if you see, that guy will see the pipeline, okay, fine, it's telling it's running. It's tried to doing the .NET Restore and all that stuff. It will run, but sometimes it can fail because the edit is not properly done. And if it fails, that particular reviewer, whosoever is reviewing a pipeline, can simply say, you know what, it is failing. I cannot say really approve this out. I'll simply go ahead and reject this. I'll say I reject this. Simple. If you reject it, I'm just blocking the PR. If the PR is blocked, my pipeline or my file won't get updated. If my file is not updated, my pipeline is untouched. If my pipeline is untouched, the SDLC is smooth, meaning the software development lifecycle is going without any issues out there. So this is how I can now establish, or now I can achieve a control on who can edit and how can they edit. And I can also put multiple branch policies, like I can do a squash merge. I can do comment resolutions, I can do multiple things out here, and I can secure my pipelines also. So earlier I was only talking about the branch policies with regard to, let's say, the code files. Now I'm telling, okay, fine, you know what, I can also secure my pipeline and then apply the branch policies on a file of the pipeline, and the pipeline will take that particular branch policy as a source, or take that particular, let's say, file as a source out there, and then it'll go ahead and say, okay, fine, you know what, it's running out of that particular source, and it's telling, okay, fine, this is the source, and the source file is only edited provided you have the right permissions. If you do not have a right permission, you cannot go ahead and edit the source file. And if you cannot go ahead and edit the source file, which means that unintended changes are not allowed. Meaning you can just cannot say that, you know what, I accidentally changed the pipeline and it got deleted. So now you need a proper work item, you need a proper approval, you need all those steps to go, I mean, all those steps to get succeeded to go ahead and make the change out here as such. So that's how we are doing all these things out here using a YAML definition. Yes, any questions still here, guys? Anyone, any questions still here? Yeah, I see voice not clear. I'm not. I'm sorry, I didn't see this. Is my voice still not clear, guys? Or is
Audible,
this
sir.
okay? Is my voice okay? Okay.
Uh,
Yes. Any questions?
sir,
Hmm?
good morning, sir.
Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Sir, under variable parent properties, that build platform is there, sir.
Hmm.
And what we mentioned instead of any CPU or else RAM, is there anything we mentioned?
See, normally build platforms are like, where does your code really need to run? Is it a 64-bit platform? Is it a 32-bit platform, and so on and so forth? It's better to have an eCPU because this needs to run anywhere. The artifact that I generate can run or should run anywhere. It should be flexible to run anywhere. So you can do something like 64, or you can do X30, X86, and so on and so forth.
One more doubt, sir.
Mhm.
In classic editors, why we cannot operate the branch policies and so why, sir?
Because the pipeline itself is a different service. In a classic editor, it's a graphical interface. It's not a file. It's a graphical interface that I'm doing. So if it's a graphical interface, I cannot save this entirely, or I cannot rather take this entirely and put this under my repository where the branch policies are there. So I need to convert it into some file, and that file is a YAML file for me right now.
Okay, sir, YAML is the best option to create a file.
Yes, I would
Yes,
say,
sir.
according to my opinion, it's the best option to go ahead and, let's say, create a pipeline. And we need to, let's say, look at creation of pipelines from a YAML perspective. Yes, Classic is there, but a lot of companies are using YAML these days. We are seeing a lot of companies moving away from Classic because of the benefits of YAML that it has. Again, one of the other benefits is that, you know what, I can just simply take this pipeline. I can simply take this file. Probably I have another client working on another, let's say, project. I can go into that particular project. I can simply create a file here, and I can run a pipeline here as well. I can simply go ahead, tell, okay, fine, you know what, I need a file here, test.yaml, paste my entire file, else you can say commit. And once I commit it, right, I can simply go into the pipeline service, I can say new, and I can create a pipeline out of it. It's as simple as that. So I don't know which repository that I committed, but yes, I think it's a Docker or something like that. So let's see. I can simply say, okay, okay, fine, you know what, it's a existing pipeline. I can take that particular pipeline file, get started. That's it. Even the migrations are very easy. To take from one project to throw it into another project is super easy out here. All I need to do is just change a couple of things like, what is the name of the project and all that stuff. Once that's done, I can simply go ahead and start using my YAML, or I can simply go ahead and start using these pipelines out here as such.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yes, any more questions, guys?
Hi, good morning, sir. Sir,
Good morning.
can we use environmental variable in YAML files?
When you say environmental variable, can you please elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Like the global variables?
I mean, can you give me one example when you say environment variable? I just want to see understand what exactly do you mean by that, or do you
Mm,
mean a variable group?
yes, sir. Yes, I'm sorry. The group.
Yes, you can use a variable group. So instead of giving variables, you can say hyphen space group. You can give the name of your group. Let's say something like development.
Okay.
You can use the name of the group. You can call the entire variable group out here.
Okay.
Instead of
Thank you,
declaring
sir.
individual variables, you can call the entire variable out here as such.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Any more questions, guys? Anyone?
Good
Any
morning,
more
sir.
questions that you take? Good, please.
Madhu sir. Yes, sir. Here also same in this. Sorry, once creating YAML file, same
Hmm.
like development. What we done in the development side. Here also Scrum Master will assign a work item for this right, sir, for approval.
I'm sorry. Can you come again, please? There also, I didn't get you.
So after sorry, DevOps engineer develop after creating this pipeline.
Hmm.
Again, if you want, if there are any changes are there, so here in this case also Scrum Master will assign, sorry, Scrum Master only assigning works to this DevOps engineer only, sir.
Yes. Yes. Scrum Master will assign the work to the DevOps engineer. Yes.
Okay, okay, it's same like what we done in the development coding,
Exactly.
like
The
that.
same like what did we do in, let's say, the development? Same thing we can apply
Okay,
here
okay.
also.
And one thing, sir, which is the best practice, I mean, in when you and I go into the in organization,
Hmm.
sorry, creating pipeline using classic converter and exporting to the YAML, which is the best, or else creating from the scratch, which is one is the best practice, sir,
I would
when I go
say
into the organization. Mhm.
yes. So I would say as a starter for me, I don't probably know how to create a YAML. It'll be a little
Gotcha.
alien for me. The language is a little alien for me. So you can convert the classic into a YAML file, and you can take help from your classic files out here, or you can take help from this particular file. So for example, it has variables, it declared variables. It said okay, it's using that particular variables and so on and so forth. So it's easier for me to, let's say, go ahead and use it right away, telling that okay, fine, this is how the variable is and so on and so forth.
Uh, okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks.
Yes. Any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any more questions? All right. So that's it from mine today. And tomorrow we'll extend this pipeline a little bit. We'll add one more stage called deployment, and we'll see how a build stage is different from deployment. It's going to be slightly different. But what I want you all to do is just go through this particular pipeline, try to, let's say, create a pipeline out here, run the pipeline, produce the artifact. And tomorrow we'll try to use that particular artifact and deploy using an ARM template and etc. Same thing by using a YAML pipeline out here. So once we build the YAML pipeline, it's going to look something like this. Let's go ahead and I think this is the YAML build. Let's see. So I have something like build, and then I have multiple stages like dev, QA, UAT, production, testing, staging, and all that stuff. So you can have multiple things out here. So if you edit this particular pipeline, this is how the file looks like. It's an exhaustive file which does a build and deployment. And again, if you see this is the idea that I want to, let's say, implement. Is here we have a build just like we did. And if I collapse this out, then we have a development stage. Then we have a QA. Then we have a staging environment or a UAT environment. Then we have a production, all under the stages. So I want to replicate the same idea, and we'll see how do we implement this out here as such. Okay, that's it from mine, guys. Thank you, and have a good day ahead. Okay, tomorrow. Oh, sorry. Tomorrow we have a class on Monday. I will inform that if we have a class, I'll let you all know in let's say prior. Otherwise, the next session will be on Monday. Yes, I forgot it's a Friday today. Okay, thanks, guys. Thank you.